Will commercial closed LLM solutions become very similar to the death of Solaris and SGI? Let's talk a little bit about those proprietary Unix operating systems. They are operating systems that I had a lot of experience with in my career. I started off really professionally doing IT in about 2000. I worked at Caltech, and they had a very expensive SGI system. They also had very expensive Solaris systems. I also used SGI when I was working at Turner Studios. They had just tremendous SGI systems for doing visual effects. So that period from, let's say, 2000 until, let's say, around 2010, there was a lot of churn going on in terms of the proprietary operating system. So let's look at some of the things that occurred. One of them was that Solaris itself was undergoing changes, and also it at some point merged with Oracle. And once Oracle acquired Sun, all of a sudden this big corporate entity stifled innovation and support for the operating system. So if we look at a company like OpenAI, for example, could this also happen? And I think we could definitely see parallels here where there was some initial innovation, but now that we have free open source competitors, we also have, a close partnership with a very stagnated company like Microsoft, which basically acquires company, doesn't really do any innovation itself. Could that actually be the same destiny for a company like OpenAI? If we look at some of the market dynamics as well, the commodity PC and also completely free Linux led to a decline of these expensive Unix workstations. And a good example of this is when I was working at Caltech, again, year 2000 to 2003, there were very expensive Linux machines, but there were also very expensive Solaris machines. But if you look at the difference, the expensive Linux machines were, let's say, pennies on the dollar. So we can see the same thing in terms of DeepSeek, right? Where you have something that's pennies on the dollar, and you have these really expensive commercial closed systems. Maybe Anthropic could also go down a similar path as OpenAI. I think we see more of that potential like premium Unix story happening with OpenAI than we do maybe with Anthropic, because they're a little more, co-joined with AWS, and it seems like they potentially are spending less money. But if you look at the money that's been spent by OpenAI and you look at some of the things they're doing, it really does have a lot of similarity to the proprietary operating systems. And some of the things that you can think about would be, after a while, because they're closed systems, are you going to get the same experience with the closed system as you are going to get with the open system? So right now we see parity, right, where we see DeepSeek is essentially slightly above OpenAI. But what I've seen in my career in the last, let's say, 30 years or so, is that typically open source starts to exceed the user experience of closed source, because in closed source, you don't have a community developing something. What happens is you have product managers, or you have HIPPO, right? You have the highest paid person's opinion. The CEO, for example, may not know what they're doing, and they may go in and tell the product manager and the engineers to build some kind of feature. It turns out that nobody wants that feature. And so that's one of the real problems with something that is a central component of an IT system like the operating system, or in this case, the large language model, is that there really is not a historical precedence for these closed systems being the leader. They may initially come out because they keep everything secret, or they're looking at public research papers, and then they're making their own private versions of things where they don't share their information. So they're kind of leeching off of the public, but eventually the public can figure out any innovation that they've done, also do it in the open version, and then the open version will take over. And many people are very wary of vendor lock-in and these corporate practices. Oracle in particular has had a lot of negative criticism because they're very aggressive with pricing. They have a bad reputation. Likewise, Microsoft has had a very aggressive reputation. If you look at the Microsoft products in general, they're not great, right? We have Microsoft Teams, which is a widely acknowledged one of the worst chat systems ever invented. We also have Microsoft Office, which is really a subpar editor. It's got a subscription fee. You wonder what it is actually doing. Like, why do I even want this software when I can install Ubuntu or Kubuntu or some other Linux distro and use a free LibreOffice tool that works good enough? And so we also can see that community development plays a role as well in terms of developing features for things. And a lot of times the community development is better than the proprietary. And then in terms of cultural shifts here too, it really depends on what it is that an organization is looking to do. If you see maybe the corporate structure shifting towards a very regimented and very tight structure, like essentially Windows was in the early 2000s, it's kind of a bad vibe, right? Where people don't want to be associated with Windows. It's what the boss uses. They wear a tie and a suit, and they're very stuffy. But the Linux people had beards, and they were hackers, and they're like trying out new ideas. So similarly, you can go into ChatGPT and kind of send your data to them, but it's going to go to some proprietary system and be indexed, and that system, maybe you don't trust it, and then your boss maybe is monitoring what you're putting into this system. But you can see that in a more open system, you're actually doing those queries locally. So what I see is that we could see the sudden death of OpenAI. We could see the sudden death of these proprietary systems. If we look at just recent history of proprietary Unix systems, there's some real trouble on the horizon for closed systems, especially because they've spent so much money. It's unlikely that they'll be able to get a return on their investment. They could try lots of different things that people do. Aggressive sales is probably what you're going to see. Also, the concept of doubling down, where people claim, if they've already been caught making claims that are not true, they'll just double them, right? So if someone said, hey, AGI is coming in a couple years, then they say, oh, AGI is coming in 6 months. And then if you get caught again, you say, and AGI will come in 3 months. And then in addition, we'll be able to fly to Mars. And, you kind of, make it more and more of a large story when you're embellishing here. And this potentially could be something we see pan out. So I guess in a nutshell here, to wrap things up, is that it'll be a very interesting space to watch. We already know that the Linux moment has hit for large language models, and also things could develop where we have small language models. We have lots of different ways to use systems, but this idea that we have this, company, oftentimes a predatory type company, like in the case of Windows, where Bill Gates was spreading misinformation about Linux and stopping innovation. If we see those same things pan out, people are smart and they understand how to get around it. And you could see Europe, you could see China, you could see India, you could see South America, Mexico. You could see these regions go, wait a second, we're going to do our own open versions. We're going to run free software. We're going to run free large language models. We're going to be able to do these recipes ourselves. So I think there's a very interesting future ahead, and it's not the future that is being pitched, where these American companies have closed source solutions, and those are the only ways to use AI. Also, some of the benefits that people are talking about AI, like agentic AI and AGI, etc. I think there's going to be some of that, right? We'll be able to use automation, but in general, with technology, you should always divide by, let's say, 10. Especially if you're talking to people who are billionaires that are running corporations, they lie, and they lie very big because they want you to believe what they're doing. The history, though, doesn't pan out in terms of corporations being the innovators. Really, the innovation comes from the community. And I think that's what we're going to see with large language models.